So we want to turn these surprises into non-surprises or something. How are we going to do that? We've got a software tool for you. It's called ChaosMonkey for Spring Boot. My name is John Fletcher.
I'm Manuel Wessner.
We work for CodeCentric AG and we in Germany, and we are maintainers of this piece of software. So we want to kick straight off with a live demo and show you a few things about how you can use it. This is just a really simple application we wrote. If you want to use a Spring Boot plugin, then you're going to need a Spring Boot application to test it with. So we've written a very simple application, which Manuel explained.
Yeah, it's just a very basic Spring Boot application. We got an endpoint, which is just movies. The app is about recommending a movie for a user. Just take any streaming service. Like, do you want to watch Inception or some other movie? So it just has a normal REST controller with one endpoint. This endpoint calls a service, get movie. This in turns get recommended movie, which is just a plain list of predefined movies. It's just very basic, and for simplicity's sake, we just take a random movie off that list. And the movies are provided by a database.
Yeah. So in theory, it's getting it based on user preferences or something. It's a recommender. Okay, so now if you could just show us with Postman.
Yeah.
We're using Postman if you're familiar.
So let's just start
yeah, we want to
start the application.
Yeah, exactly. And we're using Postman. If you're not familiar with it, it just helps you to make REST calls and see the JSON output that comes back. So we just make a request to this endpoint. Okay, so application functioning normally. Now let's see what we can do with ChaosMonkey for Spring Boot. How do we get started with that?
Yeah, the simplest way is like to add a dependency to your existing application. So either, it doesn't matter if you have Gradle or Maven, just add it. So we have one dependency, ChaosMonkey Spring Boot. You add that. So now you got the library. It still needs some config. I prepared a little bit of config. I will explain you right on. So that's our application properties.
Yeah, so just having the dependency in there is not going to change anything initially. We need to start the app. You need to activate the Spring Profile ChaosMonkey, first of all. And then you're going to need to activate, you need to enable ChaosMonkey for Spring Boot as well.
Yeah, that's the second line. You need to enable it like actively. So then we have kind of watcher. This means what you're going to attack. Like you have different like annotations. For example, in this case, we attack service. So we attack this class, which is annotated with service. We have an assaults level. John can explain you better than mine.
The level means how many of the incoming requests will be attacked. So 1 means every single request. If you put 5 there, it'll be 1 out of every 5 requests, approximately. It's done not every 5th, but random, around about every 5th will be attacked.
So yeah, and the last line is like we attack using latency. So we inject latency to our service. That's kind of different assaults we have. So let's see how it goes. We move to Postman again and do the same request where we had a few milliseconds. Now it turns out to be 2 seconds. I do another one.
Yeah, and if you see the requests will actually take slightly different times because the latency is, by default, it's a random amount of latency that'll be added between 1 and 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So we can change that?
Yeah, we can change that. Like we can introduce a fixed delay. Like by just defining a couple of additional properties. So latency range start and end. We just define the same amount of time. So we assume 3 seconds it's going to take to get a movie out of our endpoint. So our application started. First request takes a little bit longer.
Yeah, this one will take a bit more than 3 seconds.
That's 4, but the next one. So yeah, 3 seconds.
All right. Yeah, well, we've shown how, obviously you've seen we're restarting the application every time, but if we want to do real experiments, it is a bit inconvenient to have to restart your application to start the experiment and stop the experiment. So it would be nice if we could just have the application running, and at runtime, we could tell, okay, now we want to have this assault running, and then we want to turn it off again.
So what we can do is like enable actuator, which is like some endpoint where you can, by a REST endpoint, enable and disable certain things like Chaos Monkey, for example, and we can configure our attacks and our watchers like using Postman, for example.
Yeah, by REST calls, yeah. So actuator is just a built-in part of Spring Boot. So there are lots of different functions of Spring Boot which use actuator, and Chaos Monkey for Spring Boot plugs into that.
We just need to add the settings which expose this REST endpoint for configure that by any REST client. All right. So let's see. Now we have it like enabled. So we can configure now this stuff using Postman.
Yeah, so now we're going to configure an exception assault. So we saw the latency assault just before, and another assault which we can do is exception, which means basically the requests are going to throw an exception. When the request comes in, the application will throw an exception.
Yeah, so we have this assaults endpoint, which we pass a config, JSON config. Every second request gets attacked. We don't want latency, we just want exceptions to throw. So we activate that, and we want to have it on REST controllers. So we have defined it here. We just want to have it on REST controllers, no other type of annotation. So we now don't need
Maybe we could just take a second to look at that, what we're seeing there. So they're the different options for what you can configure. So you can attack assault controllers, REST controllers, service, repository, and component.
Yeah.
Obviously component, actually technically speaking, every service, for example, is a component in Spring, but it will attack the things that actually have that annotation on them when you enable that particular thing.
So let's see how it affects our endpoint. As we see, first request, we got an internal server error, we got a Chaos Monkey runtime exception. So second request goes well. So we have level 2, so about every second request gets attacked.
Yeah, cool. All right. Then let's say we want to talk about, like our application is talking to a database. So we want to say maybe a theoretical thing could be that we can't access the database, right? We don't get a connection to the database when we want to get the user's preference. Now, because we can attack repository beans, we can run an attack for that. Let's do that.
So we just configure now only the repository, not just REST controller, just the repository, because it's actually our database or access to our database. So, and look how it goes. We assume like the same result, yeah.
Yep, okay. So now we wanted to put that into an experiment, okay? So let's say it's all very fun. We've been clicking around here and it seems to be working, but in reality, it would be nice. We don't want to be doing that much clicking. It would be nice if we had a kind of a script which could just execute it for us. So let's enable that attack, that assault. Let's see how the application responds, and then let's disable that and return to normal functionality.
Yeah, we prepared a little bit kind of experiment. It's using Chaos Toolkit, which Rasmail just talked about us. It's kind of a JSON description, how you want to have your experiments. It got a title, so we assume movie recommendation when database is down. Quite important, a steady state means like if everything is all right, we suppose a movie is recommended. So how we can check that? We can request a movie on this endpoint, should get a result in less than a second, and it should return HTTP status code 200.
Yeah.
That's that.
So we're basically saying that at any point in time, no matter what's happening, our system should be responding to that request with 200 and should be giving some movie.
So it's kind of an assert in like testing. So, and now our actually testing, what we do is like, first we enable Chaos Monkey. The good thing is Chaos Toolkit has an integration for Chaos Monkey, so you don't need to actually make the post request we just saw at Postman. So you just can pass the actuator URL and you can use the enable Chaos Monkey function. After that, you configure the salts. So what we do now, we attack every request. We want to have exceptions, and to make it a little bit more realistic, we have a connect exception. And the arguments are like the parameter of the exception we pass here. So we pass a string which connection timed out. So to make it
That's a bit more like the exception you would actually get if you can't connect to the database.
So, and we want to have that now a regular post because that feature isn't implemented. It would be probably great for pull requests.
We need live. We need to be able to update the watches from the Chaos Toolkit, because we previously, it's a more recent update in Chaos Monkey for Spring Boot. After you start Spring, the application, you weren't able to change the watches. You weren't able to say that now the service watcher is active or now you had to do it at startup. And that's why I think the Chaos Toolkit doesn't support changing that in the experiments. Yeah. But now, oh yeah?
Yeah, if you call the changing of those values, as long as you can change them at some point through the API call, then you should be able to change them inside the method if you want to change them during the execution.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
we have to.
I don't know if the underlying API has that in there yet.
I think that's the point. I think it's still possible by Chaos Toolkit, but it's not like with the function change as all configuration, because it's quite a new feature, I guess, to changing that watchers at runtime. Before it wasn't possible, and that's probably the reason. So here we pass the same arguments, like we just want to have it on repository and it's good to go. All right, so I will just make a first request just to see how it goes. Now I will run the experiment. No.
Right. So at the moment the application is running with no chaos assaults configured. Is that right? Mm-hmm.
I think it's still from the old one, like the
old configuration.
Exceptions. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But
so maybe do I need to reset it? Let's see.
I think this is going to fail. Let's see.
Let's see. It's live coding, so we assume it can fail. So yeah. How you read this is like, in the beginning, you look at the steady state, movies recommended, probe, we actually try it. It says it's not in a given tolerance, means it took longer than 1 second to answer. Then in the end, we roll back. I haven't showed you that. There is a rollback function, which is actually like at the end of each run, you do that. You disable Chaos Monkey.
Yeah, so this one didn't actually even start the experiment because the steady state wasn't valid even.
Exactly.
Before.
So,
but now it's disabled Chaos Monkey, so now it will run.
Yeah. So we disabled Chaos Monkey. We don't have any attacks. So I suppose now the steady state works. And what do we have? Now it looks good. We have steady state. The steady state is met. So actually it can request a movie in less than a second. Then we enable the Chaos Monkey, configure the attacks and the watchers. So we do that again. Steady state is not in a given tolerance because we now get exceptions.
Yep, the repository beans throwing the exception because it can't connect to the database.
Exactly. So we roll back everything. We disable Chaos Monkey, and the result of Chaos Toolkit, steady state has deviated, a weakness has been discovered. And we have a weakness in this case.
Yes.
We cannot recommend movies. We can show that in Postman 2. It's like now crashing with exception.
No, because you've disabled
chaos.
But it doesn't matter. It's not requesting movies, correct? It's not delivering movies, but we want to. We want to deliver movies all the time. Even when the database is down, we can't get the movie which the user might be recommended to the user based on his viewing preferences, but we want to recommend him some kind of a movie that everybody likes.
So your favorite movie probably?
I know what it would be.
Titanic. Right? So we prepared a little bit of fallback logic. It's on our master branch. So on our movie service, we have now Titanic as our fabulous fallback movie. So how the get movie method we just adjusted. So how does you read that? It's actually using a library called Waiver. It's part of a resilience library, Resilience for J. Basically, it's just a simple method of writing try, catch, exception, just at one line. So what is this? We call get recommend movie, and if there is any exception throw, we just return our fallback movie Titanic. All right. So I think we just still configured the attacks, right? So we can
run the experiment.
Show it in Postman first.
Oh, let's see. I don't know.
Let's see. So
you have to restart the app first.
I did restart it, but it's still.
You would need to reconfigure the attack.
Yeah, true. So let's run the experiment.
Let's run the experiment. Yeah.
So let's run it again. So now we see steady state is met. We enable chaosmonkey. We configured assaults. Again, the repository watchers. And it's still going. So we now return Titanic, and it's a movie recommendation, somehow at least. And we disable chaosmonkey again, and now we have an experiment completed.
Cool. So if you want to run that more frequently, if you want to run that inside of a script or build chain or something, that Chaos Toolkit won't give you a sort of like a 0 or 1 kind of response, like a return code, but you can grep for certain text. At least that's what I got to. You can grep for text, which will tell you, because it prints certain text if your experiment fails or doesn't or passes, and you can grep for that, and grep will give you a response code to tell you whether that worked. Unless there's been an update from Russ's side. Not yet. So we talked about it before. Yeah. So that's one way you can do that. Yeah. So is that the end of what we wanted to demo?
Yeah, I think so. As far as I know. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a few slides that we want to share with you as well about basically where the project chaosmonkey for Spring Boot.
Yeah, you can find our demo case in this GitHub URL.
Is this thing plugged in?
Yeah, it's supposed to be. Doesn't work?
No.
Not anymore.
Oh, well, we can use
I can.
Hold on. Yeah, you can use them. That's fine. Oh, I know why. There's this on-off switch on the side. You put it to on. Okay, here we go. So a bit of history. This project was started by a colleague of ours called Benjamin Wilms. And he was, a few years ago, he was building fallbacks and things. He was building like circuit breakers and other resilience patterns into his applications. But he wanted to test whether that stuff actually works. I've been, by the way, in various places where they're building this stuff and nobody ever tested when any of these things actually work. So maybe you've experienced that too. Well, Benjamin wanted to know whether the stuff he was building actually worked, and he had no easy way to do it. And he found out there are a few tools out there which you had to install, and it was the various complications in using them. So he said, well, why don't I just write something for Spring Boot? And so that's why he started this application. And with the help of this plugin, he was able to test his resilience patterns. He didn't need to install anything on the servers. That's why, that's one of the things which is great about using this plugin. And he didn't need any permissions from anyone. He could just get up and get running with that. So that was successful for him. He actually has now gone on to start to work on a startup. So our company, Concentric, said to him, management said to him, why don't you go and start a startup about chaos engineering? So that's what he did. It's kind of cool when management says that to you and sends you off. And so he actually passed it on to us, the project, said, can someone else maintain it? So there's a few of us from CodeCentric that are maintaining the project. And we're pretty responsive to issues, and basically we're pretty active there. Yeah, that's our little advertising. Please get involved if you want. If you're interested in chaos engineering, don't know where to get started, well, one thing you could do is have a look at our project and maybe commit something. As I said, there's a few of us involved, and we're pretty active. So any help's appreciated.
Yeah. All right. Talking about recent changes we made in the Chaos Monkey for Spring Boot. Like from our past release, we got a new feature, so we want to introduce a couple. So we have two different types of assaults. One is the request assaults. We just saw on every request we do something like latency or other stuff like exception. And we also have runtime assaults, which means, for example, with this config, you see you can kill our application every hour. So that's the config, and our new feature was having cron expressions to schedule attacks. It's like the original Chaos Monkey bit, which from Netflix, which just turned down your application at some random point.
Yeah,
it's like that.
Because it doesn't really make sense to have this kind of assault based on incoming requests, but rather based on a timing. And the next one as well.
Wouldn't be good on each request you kill your app. So
yeah.
Memory assault, which here we consume memory to a certain amount you configured. So for example, with this config, we fill 5% of memory every second until we reach 95% of memory. So, and hold it for 40 seconds. You can test things like out of memory exception. How does your application behave with that?
Yeah, this assault is a little bit flaky because different JVMs and different versions of Java and things act differently with garbage collecting and stuff. So we had some pain with it. So definitely play around with it, but just be warned, it doesn't always work perfectly.
Yeah, quite hard though. So, and John is not a little bit talking about the roadmap.
Yeah, so what's upcoming? Well, one of the things which, we showed you a few demos now. To keep it simple, we just kept it all inside one application. But obviously, one of the main things you're interested in is applications talking to each other over the network. And often, maybe you'll be attacking a system which is a backend for a client, and you want to see how that client reacts or something. Well, in this case, we thought about outgoing HTTP calls. Now, in Spring, you use REST template or web client. They're the two classes that Spring gives you to make HTTP calls going out. So we want to attack those calls going out over the network and introduce latency or problems and things onto those calls. And the other thing is reactive. I've done a bit of work with reactive applications in Spring Boot. And so I think some of the things we're doing there will work directly with reactive as well, makes sense. But it's a couple of things which we need to rethink how we're doing that for what makes sense if you're doing chaos engineering with reactive applications. So that's also what's coming up soon. Yeah, so now that was Chaos Monkey for Spring Boot. And we think that it's a great way to get started because if you're using Spring and you want to get started with chaos engineering, you don't need to install any tools. So you don't need any special permissions. You can just get up and running in a few minutes, like we just showed you. So it's a fantastic way to get running, to get started with chaos engineering.
Yeah, even the dependency step is just optional. You can even include it in just command line. If you put java -jar, you can put it on a class loader. So you don't need to even have this Chaos Monkey dependency in your production environment.
In your POM, yeah. So those are some of the advantages of Chaos Monkey for Spring Boot, but obviously, if you're not using Java, or if for might be other reasons where you're going to need some other tools. So we thought we'd just point out a few other things that are out there. Traffic control. If you want to do some low-level Linux kernel stuff, you can use traffic control. Look at that crazy thing. We showed you the nice way to introduce latency with our application, but this is at a infrastructure level. This crazy command here is going to introduce latency on the Ethernet ETH0 interface, basically. So
yeah, maybe here a letter off will take some problems too with it. All right. We have another tool which is called Stress CPU. It's also a command line tool. It's in most Linux distributions included. Here again, we have like producing a high CPU load. It's quite a pain to get the hang of it, of all these options. So here we for 10 seconds, I think, on 2 CPUs, we introduce 128 megabytes load. Another more cooler tool is Pumba. Pumba attacks Docker containers mostly. It has these commands available, so you can make the same, like emulate network delays. You can pause containers, you can stop and kill them, and even remove it. So
for comparison, there's the latency thing again, but with Pumba, so introducing latency onto connections for that particular Docker.
You can even install it on Kubernetes as a daemon set, so you have Pumba available on your whole cluster, if that's what you want. It's kind of dangerous sometimes, but...
And then it's kind of cool, if you look out there for chaos engineering tools, there's some crazy stuff out there. Like a lot of people have just sort of mucked around a bit and started some hobby project, and it's sort of half worked or it doesn't work. There's better stuff and not so good stuff.
Yeah, there are not a lot of tools in general in chaos engineering.
But my personal favorite...
KubeInvaders. So it's kind of playing Space Invaders on... You connect the Space Invaders on your Kubernetes platform, and the aliens represent pods, which are containers. So as your spaceship, as you kill the aliens, your Kubernetes pods will get killed. So don't do it in production, I guess.
Yeah, and then, Netflix was the kind of the one that kicked this stuff off, and then all the kind of big cloud people like Amazon and everyone there, they're all doing chaos engineering. Well, there's another big cloud provider called Alibaba, and these guys are doing chaos engineering too. So recently they published Chaos Blade. We haven't investigated it, or we just found out about it just recently. And I don't even know, if you want to use it, it looks pretty good, from what it says in the documentation.
Yeah, it has it attacks different things. It can even attack C++ application. It can attack Java applications. It can attack Docker, like the Pumba thing, and it even can attack some cloud stuff. Sadly, we're not so fluent in Chinese, so to be honest, the documentation is mostly in English, so we just picked it up. But
I like this diagram. See these things here? Either it says it works with this, or it says installs Bitcoin miner. We're not sure which. Oh yeah? Oh, so here we go. We've got someone that speaks Mandarin. Excellent. So there you go. Allegedly, we don't know whether it works at all. Yeah. We never tried it, but that could be interesting.
At least from videos and screenshots, it looks quite well, to be honest. Yeah. We don't know. We need to try soon.
Then you can do chaos as a service. Okay, we had Russ just mentioned his ChaosIQ stuff. Cool. So they were talking about platforms that will give you, so you don't have to muck around with that TC minus network minus root minus I don't know what else, and getting your things wrong and getting one thing wrong and destroying your entire production cluster or whatever it is. Okay, we're talking about platforms which help you via kind of a web interface to schedule.
You need to have knowledge over a lot of different tools, how you call them, how you use them. So sometimes it's easier to.
Yeah, because in the end, you're not trying to become an expert on low-level tools. You're trying to actually create resilient systems. So you can talk to Russ about his platform. There's chaosmesh, which is the startup we just mentioned from our former colleague that he's just kicked off. I mean, that's literally the website went up properly a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
but he's already got a couple of people on the platform, and that gives you a screenshot. There's a couple of screenshots on his website that can show point and click a few things. And that's what I want to do. Go see the history of what I've run before and everything else. You can integrate it into your build chain. You can, like, there's a hook that your build chain will trigger stuff on the software,
on the
platform. Yep. So that's all out there too. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it's cool. So you don't need to know how stress CPU command is, stress memory. You just can click it on your platform and it does it for you. Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Thanks for watching.